I'll get started. It's great to see all of you at the UVA School of Architecture Inclusion and Equity Open House. And it's wonderful to see you all today. I'm Isla Berman. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture here. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Our inclusion and equity efforts at the school are dedicated towards supporting a democratic society and learning environment that not only serves everyone, regardless of gender, race, sexuality, religion, nationality, ability, or socioeconomic standing, but that's also dedicated to critically rethinking the culture and structures that we've inherited as an academic institution and also within our disciplines. Since late last spring, with the much needed Black Lives Matter protests and our own groundswell-based call to action, we pursued our inclusion and equity efforts that have been developing over the last 4 to 5 years with a renewed urgency to work towards setting a precedent for racial equity and social justice in our disciplines, and to also ensure that this is happening at the core, not the periphery of our efforts. And this is a larger collective effort that really takes all of us. And I want to thank, and you will hear from these folks, but I want to thank Sheila Crane, who's our chair of inclusion and equity, Barbara Brown Wilson, who's our professor in planning and director of the UVA Equity Center, Elgin Cleckley, who's our NOMAS advisor, and our entire I&E committee and student groups. NOMAS, Amira Davis is with us today, Manifesta, and you'll hear from a number of folks, and AISA, which is our international student group, for all of their efforts. As a public institution, our president had said that we strive not simply to be great, but also to be good. Because to be a leader in public education means to embrace a model of inclusive excellence. And by that, I mean excellence and equity, excellence and ethics, and excellence also that's driven by purpose, which is why for me, it's critical that as architects, landscape architects, planners, and scholars of the built environment, we focus our efforts on design and planning that matters, design that'll make a difference in the world. I have the great privilege today of introducing you to Garnette Cadogan, our Harry Porter chair at the school, who's a renowned writer and urban theorist, and who's teaching courses at the school this year focused on racial equity and the occupation of the city. As he's also been contributing to our Graduate New York studio, developing affordable housing in Manhattanville, West Harlem. He has been the Martin Luther King visiting scholar at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, a visiting fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies and Culture at UVA, and also a visiting scholar at the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University. Garnette has written extensively on what it means to be Black in America, and his work has been described as exploring the promise and perils of urban life, the vitality and inequality of cities, and the challenges of pluralism. He's the author of Walking While Black, editor-at-large for Nonstop Metropolis and New York City Atlas, and co-editor of the Oxford Handbook of the Harlem Renaissance. And I should add, beyond his many credentials, Garnette is a truly wonderful person, and we're really thrilled to have him with us. And with that, I will hand this over to Garnette. Welcome.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a week in which everybody's been glued to their screens, so we're happy that you've unglued from whatever current affairs you're watching and coming and spending time with us. And part of what we're here to do is to talk with you about the kind of stories that we tell at the university here. That architecture is nothing if not a story. A story about what it means to belong, what it means to call a place home, what it means to share space, to reimagine space, and to reimagine space in a way that is more just, and that we can all find ourselves feeling more part of its future. And with that, we're going to actually have a bunch of conversations today that tells you the way in which we tell these stories here at the school. You're going to have a pair of faculty members talking to you about their classes and how they work through these questions in their classes. That to think about belonging is to think about diversity and inclusion and equity. And you're going to have a set of students also to talk to you about their project, but also the ways in which they're wrestling with these questions within the classroom, but also in conversation with each other. And it's also going to be a chance for us to hear your voice and to hear the kind of stories that you're bringing and the kind of stories that you want to hear from us. So to begin, we're going to actually have, in a tag team of Elgin Cleckley and Barbara Brown Wilson. Elgin is professor of architecture and spends a lot of time thinking about the ways in which identity and culture and history and memory and place all intersect again to give us that sense of belonging, a sense of the future. Barbara Brown Wilson is a professor in urban studies and planning and spends a lot of time thinking about the way in which social movements shape and are affected by and navigate through the built world. And also like Elgin, she's raising questions to ask, how does empathy shape and affect the way in which we think about change and the way in which we work and engage with communities. And a lot of her work is focused on, how do we collaborate with community partners in a way that we pull alongside them and ask, what's their vision of what they want to be and how they'd like to see their communities. So I'm going to hand it off to both of them. They'll tell you a bit about their courses and the school, and also open up for you to begin thinking about the kind of conversations you'd like to have with them.
Thank you, Garnette, and hello to everyone. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'd like to give a bit of context about my work, as Garnette mentioned, but also share a little bit about the work you'll see from my design research studio that I'm running right now. As Garnette mentioned, I work at these intersections of identity, culture, history, memory, and place, but they all started for me here as a student at UVA. I went here for architecture school, and I felt obsessed with this landscape and understanding what it taught me and what I could learn from it. And I'm really fortunate to come back to UVA at 2016 to teach. And since I've been back, I've been able to set up empathic design, which is how I teach, the initiatives I work on, and also my professional practice. So it's based on my professional experience, but also the great experience and support I've had here at UVA. In it, I run seminars. In our seminars, we investigate the ideas of empathy and empathic designers, a series of principles, methods, and themes which produce an analysis of the spaces, the systems, the objects, the products, the graphics, the experiences that are connected with topics of equity and inclusion. That work also includes learning from these actual designers, but applying those and putting those into work at two actual sites. This semester, we're looking at the Marcus David Peters or Lee Circle in Richmond, the At Ready stock site where the Confederate statue used to be in Court Square. But last year, we looked at paper monuments, Charlottesville, with Sue Mobley of Colocate, New Orleans. The idea of looking at the people, the places, the events, and the moments that occurred here in town. We've gotten lots of funding for that as well, and we'll be implementing that here in Charlottesville. But the work you'll see today from Rebecca Hinch and Mira Davis is about the warmth of other suns, connected to the Great Northern Migration. The Warmth of Other Suns is our book that's our common read. The idea of the 6 million and the reality of 6 million African Americans who went from the South to the North, including my own family. The idea is, what do you do in response in New York City? This idea of arrival, thinking about all those ideas of the intersections and how that can evolve into Vanderbilt Hall and Grand Central Terminal. We read the book together. We looked at empathy readings at the same time. We also looked at resources of social, cultural, and historical backgrounds, focusing on the Northern Pathway. That led to a series of modules that we follow through in the studio, where we look at that timeline. We map Jim Crow, looking at regional architecture, but also going up the East Coast, responding then in Grand Central Terminal and also in New York City as we arrive. A lot of in-depth research of Romare Bearden's work and Jacob Lawrence as a design thinking way to respond to these topics, and then our response that you see here. You can see some early images here from Jane Lee and Lauren Brown, taking in those readings and then responding to them in form. The work's been incredibly transformative, and so it's the space and community we created. Within it, you travel through Vanderbilt Hall and you begin to understand from an empathic point of view 3 stories. Lauren Brown captures them perfectly here of Ida Mae Gladney, Robert Pershing Foster, and George Swanson Starling. Within that space, you begin to understand their lives, what they overcame, and then what their lives become in New York City. Omer delved really into this idea of Jacob Lawrence's work and also into Romare Bearden's work and you become part of it within the space. You can see inside the hall here what that effect feels like. Are you in a barber shop? Are you in a educational space? This collage is becoming involved in the space itself and create new forms of architecture which can be manipulated at different times. And then Gabriel Andrade is looking at work from Simone Brown, this idea of surveillance, talking about Black experience for the transatlantic slave trade, but also continuing to now. And this idea of surveillance and how it plays itself out within this space. What do you learn and understand of each other's experiences? And this really ties back to the empathy readings, where we looked at lived experience as that space. So you'll see some work very shortly from Rebecca and also from Mira, but Barbara, I'll turn it over to you.
I need sharing, please. Whoever's host. Let me share my screen.
You're right there, Barbara. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, you should be good to go.
Got it. All righty. I thought it would be best to really sort of smoosh the courses that I thought you all would be interested in today. To kind of touch on these themes of equity and inclusivity and diversity together. So I teach a few methods of community engaged research classes that, as Garnette so kindly said, are about power redistribution and who gets to make decisions and how and why. And then also a course called Ecological Democracy that's much more about resource redistribution and who gets to make design choices and you know, how they affect their lives and such. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview, and I think we have people that have students that are going to be able to speak on all of these issues present. So when I was when I was a student, a doctoral student, Katrina hit New Orleans, and I was, as Garnette mentioned, studying urban social movements, like how do we get our values into the built world, and like grassroots values, but you know, real people's values in their own community. And I encountered this flyer, and it has just stuck with me ever since, because it's a slogan that actually is used in several different social movements. Nothing about us without us is for us. But it was actually responding to the, you know, the influx of people like me that were asked to come to New Orleans to help think through how we might problem solve and you know, work towards disaster recovery. But we're coming without the lived expertise of what it's like to be, you know, a person with the wisdom and appreciation of New Orleans and other communities that were hit on the Gulf Coast. And so I've spent a lot of my time trying to think through, what does that mean for the field, right? It's not easy to make decisions with a grassroots orientation, and why is that? And how might we do it differently if we were really going to open up other possibilities for how we move towards sort of equity in our decision-making process? And so here's a spectrum that actually I had a couple hundred designers help me mark out on the word soup of our fields and their kind of public interest, social impact design. Language is fluid, but I wanted to kind of point out, and I teach a lot about this in my classes, that there's a spectrum of kind of work that is about the product. It's about the parklet, or, you know, whatever you're building. And then there's work that's about the capacity for self-determination, the ability for people to improve their own lives in whatever way they want. And so, you know, all design work can be really good on any realm of these spectrums, but placing yourself with intention along them is part of the goal for me. And so there's times when work really needs to be very professionally driven. And then there's other times that are more kind of in line with civil rights values, where the work is much more community driven, right? Who's making the decisions. And so a lot of my teaching is trying to help you figure out where you're best suited on this spectrum and how those skills are best applied, but depending on the context and the partnerships. In Charlottesville, I am lucky enough to have some amazing partners, some not yet technically adults, but that are actually making change in their own lives. A few years ago, Liz Ogbu was our Porter Chair visiting professor, but she for years and years has been working with me here in Friendship Court, which is a place-based Section 8 community going through redevelopment. And young people have been paid for their time to help us make every single set of decisions, and really worked on this project for 2 years. They ended up with the help of an alumnus of the A School, Alex Gillum, actually transforming one of their courtyards into a really beautiful playground that they get to use right now, but also informs the larger redevelopment. So I do a lot of teaching there. And then in terms of thinking through bigger picture, I'm often trying to get people to think about systems change. Like, what does this look like if we really try to think about these problems that are intractable, climate justice, racial justice, as points of, looking at it from the points of intervention in the system in the built world. And so I teach about moving from a singular project, and Michael, actually one of the students here today, has been working with me on this project for years, trying to think through how do we nationally raise the standard of practice so that no person is ever displaced from their community involuntarily in the name of housing redevelopment. So we don't ever do another sort of mass displacement of people like urban renewal. And I co-founded a center that has a long name. It's the Democracy Initiative Center for the Redress of Inequity through Community Engaged Scholarship. Our founding director is a lawyer, so she said exactly what we're going to do in the title. But basically our mission is to really work towards, as Dean Berman pointed out, the university's commitment to not just being great, but also good. And we think, and as is articulated in the university strategic plan, that being good is about being a good neighbor and about being a respectful partner, where everybody benefits from any project. And so in many senses, we are not in charge of the projects. There's a leadership team that's community-based, and we just follow their lead, but students are always working with partners on projects that redress inequity in our local community. So here we've co-produced an equity atlas that's everything about it is open source, including the code. So you can go onto GitHub right now and take our equity atlas and make your own version for your own region. We have actually co-produced smaller, more kind of boutique-y projects that are about answering a question. So in this case, we had a group of government and grassroots decision makers that wanted to know sheltering in place during the COVID crisis is not equal for everyone. And so what are the factors that make it harder to shelter in place and stay healthy? And those, how do we actually make better decisions that allow for us to equitably distribute resources so that everyone stays healthy in our community? And students are always actively involved in these projects. And then, as I think Jane and Becca and a few of the, and Samantha can talk about, they're in a class that for now years has been committed to helping a local project called Mapping Seville, based on work in Minneapolis that was chronicling the ways in which racism was codified into our built environment in the 1920s. Through racial covenants and other means. And then actually right now we're helping work towards a comprehensive plan that, just like Minneapolis is, actually has the elimination of disparities and the redress of inequity as a major goal. So it's really exciting to be a part of those projects. And finally, I'll say this summer, Michael was also a key player in helping our university with a plan that I was able to co-create. That's a racial equity task force plan that's now been adopted by our board of visitors. So we're working towards goals that actually were the articulation of 50 years worth of activism. So it's a really exciting time to be here, and our students get to be involved in making the university better in many ways as they learn. I I think also I should say I'm teaching a J-term you can apply for right now. If you want to hop in, it'll be 2 weeks. It's with Gina Ripple, who's in the architecture department on climate justice in particular. So that's the middle 2 weeks of January. Thank you.
As you know, you'll do as much learning from your students, your fellow students, as much as from faculty. And we have 4 wonderful and wonderfully engaged students to talk about that. Mira, Rebecca, Samantha, and Michael. And they'll take you first from the studio, where you have a lot of your head down, looking at your designs and thinking about design. Mira and Rebecca will talk to you about their own studio projects and what it's like to work in the studio and to think about, issues of equity in the context of the studio. And then when they look up, you step outside and thinking about what it means to engage with the community. And so Michael and Samantha will talk to you about their community engagement work. So, all 4 will give you a sense of what it's like to work on these projects and how the 4 different divisions, architectural history, in urban and environmental planning, landscape architecture and architecture works its way through in their own projects, within doors and outdoors. Mira, Samantha, Rebecca, Michael.
Hi, everyone. So let me quickly. Okay, so my name is Mira Davis, and I'm a 4th year undergraduate architecture student here from Richmond, Virginia. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you guys for coming. I'm so happy to see your faces. Our disciplines can't be diversified without us, so it's just nice to see all of us here engaging in these conversations. So briefly, I'll talk about my work and the class, what I've gotten from it, and what it's meant to me, and then I'll pass it on to my peers. But so as Elgin put it, we're working through an interpretation of the Great Migration, and this is in New York's Grand Central Terminal. And the site is very important to me because out of the 6 million African Americans that immigrated through their own country, really, a large number of them walked through Vanderbilt Hall. So unfortunately, though, these stories have been kind of largely ignored and glossed over in our history books. So I'm calling my project now the director, but these things always change. But it's working to make this story undeniable. And so through this, we are kind of showing how the invisible hand is dominating the way African Americans move through the Great Migration and arguably today. So I take visitors through a spatial interpretation of Jim Crow. As you can see here, what some of these spaces make you feel, the certain ways a lot of African Americans had to go through to ultimately walk through Jim Crow, the journey of the Great Migration, the challenges of the New World, and walk out of the hand that dominates the African American consciousness. But outside of that, I've gotten to ground my work in this transformative account of the Great Migration, Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns. And I've had wonderful guest critics. Garnette and Barbara have been to our mid-reviews. And I think it's this commitment to support and resource that I've really appreciated in my studio so far. I think something that means a lot to me, although we didn't get to do it because of COVID, was that Elgin has planned for us our pilgrimage of our own. We were planning to go to some of the major sites of the Great Migration. Things like that don't get to happen these days, but it's fine. But anyway, it just goes to show this commitment to these topics and how that has really just challenged the way I think. As an African-American student, I don't really get to get into these topics with my classmates. So just having this opportunity to think about these topics academically and interdisciplinarily, I guess, with, my classmates like Rebecca, who's in landscape architecture, has, really been transformative for my education. you know, we have a lot of wonderful discourse. I've gotten to express these ideas through collage and model making, and talk through some unlearning that a lot of my classmates and I are doing. So well put by one of my classmates, Matthias. But anyway, you know, I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to say we talk a lot about food. And it's funny to me because our mural board is called The Kitchen. And we were, you know, to the preceding weeks to mid-review, we were saying, you know, what are we cooking in the kitchen for our family meal, which is mid-review. But not only are we talking about these things figuratively, we're also getting into this brain food that I haven't gotten in a while. So I think that, you know, classes like this, having this access to professors and, you know, readings and things, it's meant a lot to me. And I'm so happy to talk about these topics with the rest of my peers. So I'll pass it off to Becca.
Oh, thanks, Mira. That's really hard to follow up, so I'm not going to try, but I will show you my work. So just to give a little context, I'm a graduate student in the landscape architecture program, and I'm in my 3rd year. So I'm in Elgin's studio as part of the curriculum for my research studio. And just to give you, the graduate students, a little bit of an idea about how that works. Basically at the beginning of the fall of your 3rd year, you look at all the studios that are being offered from landscape and architecture, and you get to pick your top, I think you order them, you go all the way to like 12 or whatever there is. And you usually end up in your top, you know, 1 to 4 or so. And so I was just so happy to see that Elgin was offering this studio. I worked for Elgin as a TA when I really didn't know anything, and I think he took a chance on me that I really appreciate. And now I'm circling back and taking his class about his work. And just coming from the field of landscape architecture, so my medium normally is plants and open space and outdoors. It was certainly kind of scary and still is scary to be inside a building for a project. But I was just so excited to have the chance to grapple with this topic and this history, especially because there's a lot of amazing, well-meaning people in landscape architecture, but it is an extremely white field. And I don't think I would have this opportunity otherwise if I didn't get to go to this research studio. So I just wanted to show you all a variety of images, just to give you an idea of all the different work that kind of constitutes a studio project. So Mira had some great models. I'm including kind of these collages on the left that are just, for me, a really great visual, I guess, brainstorming tool, kind of working through the readings that Elgin and Mira have mentioned, and the concepts that we as a class were discussing, and also starting to think through my initial kind of design reactions, like what I thought I wanted to do with the space, particularly the one on the top left. Another example of work that you'll probably get into in the school would be, of course, mapping, which is an extremely helpful tool for understanding the context of your site. In this case, we have it's a tiny dot on the map at Grand Central Terminal right in the center. And here I was trying to understand where African Americans coming from the South went after they arrived in Grand Central Station, and trying to understand for my site, or my project, which I'm really trying to make kind of like an interior garden space and public space, and how that can make sense for the African Americans in New York who don't really live close to this. So how can I get people to come despite it not being convenient? And then other than that, I have some notes over here connecting to the book. Again, I'm trying to make this interior garden space. So I was noting the narratives and the moments that plants were significant, or at least like were present in a significant moment. So for example, cotton comes up, and even though, of course, the Great Migration occurs after slavery is abolished, there are many sharecroppers in the South, and this is kind of a reason that many decide to leave, because it's not a very viable way of life. Another example is sweet potato vines, which might seem kind of random, but connects back to when many people traveled on the trains to the north. They would bring things in the South that they didn't think they could bring or find in the North, or wouldn't be as good of quality. So food was one of them, and sweet potatoes and hams and other things like that were typically brought. And then one final example is, this is my plan for mid-review. So starting to kind of, Elgin and Mary can tell you, one of many iterations of mine, trying to figure out how I want to spatialize my ideas. But yeah, overall, I've just really enjoyed the experience. Just to add what Mira has said, I think our whole studio feels that Elgin is such a bright spot for us, and what is a really difficult time. So I can't speak for all studios, but I would definitely recommend to all play music at the beginning of class, which has kind of been Elgin's signature move. It has definitely kept us in good spirits. So yeah, and with that, I'll pass it on to Samantha or Michael. Sorry, I'm not sure which person's going.
I can go. Thank you. Okay. Okay. There we go. Hello, thank you so much. And it's been wonderful to see my colleagues work as well. I'm Samantha. I'm a second-year master's in architectural history in Professor Wilson's Community Engaged Methods course right now. I'm also an interdisciplinary researcher and writer trained in arts, humanities, and museum studies. And I sort of frame my subjects spatially. And I kind of wrote out what I'm going to say, so forgive me, I'm going to read some of it so I can stay on time. But learning how to responsibly interact with communities while being held accountable to them and building a trusting relationship should be, is for me of the utmost importance to those of us who speak, think, and write about and organize within current built environments. So I'll mention sort of my thesis work, which should be done next semester, and how this class has really helped me. And so what I was doing is actually looking at Northwest Arkansas, where I am from, and sort of the art worlds and art ecologies there. And really looking at and questioning what is evidence and what is an archive and what is left out of an archive, and what we can do about what is actually left out. And I'm also working like quite currently instead of much more historically. So that's really what I was struggling about. How can I bring in my personal narrative, or should I be objective? Should I just be this sort of researcher that's not, that pretends I'm not engaged in this or haven't been? And so just a little bit about that background. I spent the last 6 years in my home region in Northwest Arkansas, and I was working for both artist cooperatives, DIY spaces, city arts councils, and Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And so you see on the left, the top left, this is actually from my office window. It's this beautiful Moshe Softy building. And that's what I was looking at every day that I was working at Crystal Bridges, which is a Walton of like Walmart fame, funded and supported and led institution. And then on my nights, I was volunteering and started this DIY, do-it-yourself art space, Backspace, which is at the bottom there. And so just the differences of what I was seeing every day in this art ecology of Northwest Arkansas was really fascinating to me. And both of them also were trying to engage issues of equity and diversity in different ways. So the top right is exhibition Border Cantos, 2017, at Crystal Bridges, and I worked as an interpretation manager there. So we did sort of a map of the border and sort of history there. And then that was in the same place as the artwork, sort of contemporary structures and sculptures and images from the border. And so doing that at Crystal Bridges, while then also doing at Backspace, like a local art show, Nasty Women, that sort of really brought up women in the community. So sort of looking at those two issues at the same time, and they both relied on community engagement. So Crystal Bridges, it was sort of, intense like focus groups, very planned, advisory councils, design thinking charrettes, all of this. While back at Backspace, it was, mutual aid, one-on-one relationships, conflict resolution. So very many different ways and different people that I was involved with in doing this. So then to speak to these differences in these very different spaces in the same area, I wanted to both situate myself, but really also foreground the interviews of workers, volunteers, and artists in the community. Often you have the leaders, the CEOs, the presidents that get to speak, but like who's actually working on this as a collective effort? And that's really what I want to bring out. And so the readings and discussions we've had in this course allow me to have a background to stand up for evidence that is personal, political, activist, and very messy, and to put accountability measures in place to foster trust within the community I work. And that involves a lot of front-end planning, communication, and consent, which this course really helps me work through, and Barbara has been really great at helping me work through. So with this, I'm creating this solid foundation that is also solid in its messiness, which I think is a good thing, that then I can build my work on in the future. And with that, thank you very much.
All right, all. Well, how's it going? I'm Michael. I'll be the last student to speak, I think. I did not bring any graphics, but rather I figured I'd just tell a bit of a story about how I came here and my experience and how it relates to the topics of today. So to begin, the way that I found myself coming to UVA, I was doing management consulting and sort of flying around the country. And that experience felt really alienating to me. I didn't feel like I was anywhere close to the issues that I cared about. And so I set out to find a degree program that might help me to get closer to what it was I wanted to be doing. And thankfully I found the Urban Environmental Planning program here at UVA at the School of Architecture. And also I found Professor Wilson's Methods of Community Engagement course, which was instrumental in helping me to continue that search for how I could be useful in solving the problems that we look out and see today. That course was really instrumental for a few reasons. First, it introduced me and gave me some grounding in new modes of data collection. So I was coming from like a really quantitative world, and the methods of community engagement was the modes of data collection, excuse me, around surveys, focus groups, interviews, ethnographic research, citizen science. A lot of these things that I hadn't really been exposed to were really important to me and really enlightening. Also modes of data analysis and presentation. I know Barbara showed a handful of different projects that I've worked on, but work like counter mapping, body mapping, power mapping, these types of things that I'd never been exposed to, but that gave me new frames to analyze and present data. And then lastly, again, as Professor Wilson mentioned, orientation to community-driven research and practice. That to me was so important in thinking about how to authentically share power, not tokenism, not just checking the box, but truly sharing power and also acknowledging the expertise that communities that are often ignored or marginalized or disenfranchised can actually bring to solve the problems that we face. And taking that a step further, figuring out ways to redress historic harms. A big part of the education for me has been seeing how my earlier education just failed to acknowledge a lot of those historic harms, and centering those and how to bring those into research and practice has been a lot of my work. In the course, as Professor Wilson mentioned, we worked on the Charlottesville Regional Equity Atlas. So my group was responsible for conducting a focus group with some community leaders that helped serve as a catalyst to some of the thinking that was going on with the Regional Equity Atlas, and that work continues to progress and is really exciting. But I do want to also mention that during that course, I walked into Professor Wilson's office and I said, hey, I really want to work with you. What else can I do? And she immediately found a million different things, including the research that I continue to do to this day, which is around resident-led redevelopments across Charlottesville. So at Friendship Court, as Professor Wilson mentioned, with the Section 8 housing, at Southwood Mobile Home Park, which is a Habitat for Humanity project, and lastly, with a public housing project, South First Street here in town. And my work with those groups has involved observing the work of these resident leaders who are actively shaping their future neighborhood. It has been interviewing the sort of technical advisors that have opted to share power that traditionally is not shared, and trying to understand how they have navigated that challenging terrain. And it will involve focus groups, hopefully shortly, with the resident leaders to understand their experience. And then the last thing I'll say is Professor Wilson and I have been working to figure out how to take this really important work that's happening locally and take some of the lessons, figure out how to share power, and then how to figure out how to move it into a repertory framework for affordable housing development, and how to make it systems change so that it reaches a more national level. So we're working with the Local Initiative Support Corporation and other entities to think through how community development financial institutions that often bring money and technical expertise to projects can channel this resident-led method into their work. So it's been a pleasure to work. I'm in my last year here, so gonna be sad to go, but it really has been outstanding, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anything in my story might bring up. So thank you.
We generally don't spend our time talking at people while here at the school. We spend our time interacting with each other, and all the conversation goes on between faculty and students, and with each other. So at this point, we're going to get a little bit closer to what it's like, off Zoom, but even in this Zoom world. And so, everybody group up together, all 4 students here and faculty, and Barbara and I are going to start with a discussion, and you should also feel free to jump in and ask questions, because we also want to hear from you and hear what you're thinking, and not just tell you what's on our minds. But let me start first and have at it with the 4 students who just spoke, because we keep hearing the variety of projects that you're doing, and what you've been doing out of the context of different classrooms. But would you tell us something about the kind of support that's there at the school, the kind of support they get in the classrooms, but even beyond the classroom, the kind of structures of support that are there that prospective students might be interested in and might be curious about?
I can start. So I think there's a lot of different kinds of support. And I think especially with Zoom, it's been a lot more accessible. Like I said, I've had tons of guest critics, which is Elgin's favorite thing to do, which is nice. But I've gotten to, set up calls with people who, aren't my professors and talk about my projects. I've had Manifesta is a group at UVA Architecture School, and they hosted this colloquium, which is where I got to present my work with students and ask questions from more grad students, which is always amazing. Like I said, I'm a 4th year, but I feel like I've made so many friends with the graduate students and the undergraduate students. It's like a whole community. And when we're at school, it's just a walk up 1 flight of stairs and we're all talking. But I think it's been a lot of support from students and faculty. And not only that, but I also like to talk about my work with people who are not in the architecture school, which is always a good thing to try to do, because we design for people who are not architects most of the time. But yeah, so I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say.
While people are thinking, I wanted to ask a question of you, Mira, because NOMAS plays such a crucial role in support and encouragement and engagement in the school. Can you tell us something about NOMAS and the kind of support that also comes from NOMAS, because I'd love for us to hear the kind of support that's coming from both students and faculty.
Yeah, so NOMAS is amazing. I was president of NOMAS last year, but this year we're led by Sasha Paul and Lauren Brown. But NOMAS has meant a lot for me in that it's been just a community of students that, one, support each other, and two, advocate for each other. I've spent a lot of time, in conversations with my classmates and people in different levels, I guess, but I think we have a collective interest in making sure we're all okay and we're all on the right track in studio and professionally. And so, we've had tons of programming, but I think ultimately it's just a nice family within the larger family of the A School, because I love everybody at the A School. But it's something to be said about having a group that's prepared and willing to advocate for you if you're feeling whatever ways you're feeling. But yeah, I mean, that's been great. Also, last thing about it is it's connecting us to the larger NOMA. So I've gotten to speak with professionals in the same fields and outside of the same fields. And so not only am I in a family at UVA, but I'm in a family nationally. So it's been good so far.
Just sort of speaking to support, I think with history, especially within the A School, it does feel a little different because sometimes it is just you're alone with a stack of readings a lot of times. So it sometimes can feel like, okay, I'm sitting at my desk with all of these readings, but I think what has been, and it's been great because I've learned so much there, but I'm also really interested in interdisciplinary efforts, how we can all work in the A School together. And I will reiterate what Mira was talking about, these student organizations have been really helpful to me to meet people across all 4 of our departments, and then undergrads and graduates. So I am in sort of Manifesta, and then our architectural history group, and an editor of the student journal. So being involved in all of these different avenues that that really sort of get history in there, and then get us sort of back and forth in this dialogue. Really, there's not that much difference in how these disciplines can work together. So that's been really exciting. And I will say all of the professors have been, especially with Zoom, been really great at these one-on-one meetings and discussions of my work when I'm just this is a mess, what do I do? It's been really nice to have people to help me navigate these issues, and they're always there. So that's been really helpful.
I'll go ahead and also add, so in the planning department or in the planning school, there's the Student Planners Association, which is an outstanding group, an outstanding community. But the other thing I wanted to know is that my experience with the faculty here, I've always felt like a thought partner. I've never been exploited. I've never been ignored. Whether it's in class or in with my research, I've always been paid for my research when it was, the type of thing that, deserved or merited payment. And like I said, I've always been treated as a thought partner. My insights are appreciated, and that's been really important to me as I wrestle with new and challenging ideas, and I think that's an experience that's pretty consistent across the board.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit about specifically the landscape architecture department. I think just because we are a discipline that, we do all the computer stuff, but we are people who really love plants and being outside. And I think professors have been really understanding of that. And I've had multiple classes where you know, we've gone outside for field work, either alone or together, that I think normally wouldn't be on the syllabus, but I think they know that we need a break from all the Zoom. I've also had the opportunity to do an independent study this semester, which as like a second or third year, once you get, you know, some of the required classes done, you'll have a little more flexibility in your schedule. And so with that, me and a few other students have been working on this project called the Land Lab, which is just kind of us playing outside and then making drawings and exploring related to that. So I guess I've really appreciated the professors understanding that we might need to take our education in our own hands sometimes, especially given the circumstances, and adding, you know, rigor to that as well.
So we want to make sure that we answer all of your questions. So just want to reiterate, you can, I'm not even sure if I can see your hands when you raise them, but one of our hosts will point it out if you want to do the like Zoom raise your hand, or you can type it into the chat and we will call on you because we would like to get to know you. We'd like to meet you. There's other professors and students on the call as well, so you don't have to limit your questions to what's been presented. It can be broader. Lots of people here to answer whatever questions you have.
And we're eager to hear from you. Don't all rush at once.
I don't know how to like raise my hand and be noticed for raising it, but I guess one of the questions that I have from being an undergraduate architectural design student is if I was interested in continuing my studies in landscape architecture, how would someone who's reviewing my portfolio and my resume take my architectural studies and kind of consider me for landscape if I've never had really any background experience with landscape, but I'm still interested in it.
Maybe I'll jump in on that, Haley. So, so students, we have different paths in landscape architecture. The 3-year path that also has a small summer program, 2.5-year and 2-year. And what generally happens is the chair, program director, and committee in landscape architecture would review your transcripts, review your portfolio, and place you according to whatever, based on the background that you have. So we do this on a case-by-case basis with students. And we have our own students who are undergraduates in architecture, for example, who then decide to go into landscape architecture to do their graduate degree. And we have a number of faculty who also have dual degrees between. And the one other thing I'll add is that I think one of the great things about the school is that we are very multidisciplinary. And Becca kind of gave an example of that. So for advanced research studios, landscape architecture and architecture, as well as our urban planning students who are in the urban design certificate, they have an opportunity to take any studio that can be urban focused, landscape architecture focused, and that enables students and faculty to also cross over.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and if I could just add a little bit, just Haley, so you are aware, I'm a path 3, so that means I do an extra semester because I don't have a design background. And I know from, you know, a non-design background that can seem like really long, like you can also get a law degree in that time, but now that it's gone by, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I had more time to learn all these other things.
Right.
It's really packed in, it's a lot of great stuff. It is, you know, kind of a learning curve to learn the programs, but the undergrads go through the same thing. And it's really something that shouldn't like deter you. So yeah, definitely go for it. And if you have questions, I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. Also, what was your, just curious, your undergraduate?
Yeah, so actually, I guess I don't really like this term, but I'm a double Wahoo. I went to UVA for undergrad, not in the architecture school. I did psychology, and I also did this program called Environmental Thought and Practice, which is basically like environmental policy. So didn't do anything with like aesthetics or drawings, but I had a strong research background and writing skills, I guess, and I think that probably helped me. And I did make a portfolio, but it's certainly, I don't like show that to anyone now, but I'm here, so it's okay.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you so much. That was helpful.
Yeah.
I would also like to add that Rebecca is like someone who thinks so richly, so that makes so much sense. I did not know that was your background.
Yes.
It's really cool how you accept, I'm sorry, it's really cool how you accept so many different, like a variety of students into then the same program, because it really adds diversity to like how students think. So that's definitely very interesting. And thank you guys for answering that so well.
Absolutely. Our next question is about the PhD program. And in the case of the PhD program, it's really great to, I don't think Dr. Lee is on the call today, is he? So definitely reach out to Dr. Lee. He is the director of the PhD program and can be a bit of a steward. But I would say, I don't know, at least Sheila and I have both been advisors to people in the PhD program world. And you also, in addition to reaching out to Dr. Lee, you would want to reach out to people that you'd be interested in working with. Just send them an email, ask for a time, you know, when their office hours are, can they come and chat, and explain why your interests align with theirs, how they can be helpful to you. I know that's what I'm always looking for, is that I am legitimately able to serve your goals as a potential advisor. But the first step is always to get accepted into the program, and then there's this sort of linkage. So you kind of want to do them at the same time, where you're thinking about the program and acceptance into that, and then also who would be your guides on that journey. And you want to have a few, because really in the end it's a committee. And as we were just discussing, all the things we do often pull from all 4 disciplines. I know several of my PhD students have actually really benefited from you know, committee members outside of the School of Architecture as well. And so it's that strength of transdisciplinary work that we think we can offer. And so going ahead and trying to figure out what that would look like for you will help improve your application to the program.
And if I can just add, and is it Golnish? Am I pronouncing your name close to correct? Yeah. So you also asked about the funding. So our PhD program is very well funded. So students get full tuition for 3 years, as well as a $20,000 stipend per year. And as part of that stipend, in their 2nd and 3rd year, they get research assistantships and teaching assistantship positions as well. So in the 2nd year, you have 1 position that's either a research assistant. The 3rd year, you have 1 of each generally. And while you're here, and even beforehand, you can reach out to faculty. There are faculty listed on the website with their interests. And you can, you know, ask the faculty member to try to find a good fit. And Chichao Li, who runs the program, will also can help do some matchmaking for you in advance.
Looks like our next question from Chinar is about the application process and the sort of response on diversity, equity, inclusion. Who wants to take that?
I will start, and I'll ask Sheila to also provide her input as the chair of the Inclusion and Equity Committee. We are really interested in learning more about you and about your contributions to the School of Architecture, especially in relation to our inclusion and equity. And so we use this statement to get to know you in a way that's totally different from anything else that we'll see in your application. We do have a holistic admission process, and I'm not going to go into all of that. I do hold a separate session to talk about the admission process. This is another lens and way by which we can get to know you and how your interests align with those of the School of Architecture in relation to our inclusion and equity efforts. And Sheila, do you want to chime in a little bit here about how that statement was developed?
I mean, I can also say that our desire to include this additional lens into understanding you as a whole person and the various things that you might bring to our community that of course include your background and your academic path, but that it is partly an interest in really opening the opportunity for you to tell us more about who you are and how you imagine yourself contributing to our community. And I think also a way for us as a community to tell you something about our interests and investments as part of the application process, to let you know that we're invested in really trying to think about our applicants as complicated, interesting people whose personal stories, to go back to where Garnette started us off, are really important to us and to who we are as a school. I think this might be also a good moment to say that as part of the application process, we inaugurated last year a new series of diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships named for Edward Wayne Barnett and Audrey Spencer Horsley, the first African-American male graduate of the School of Architecture and the first African-American female graduate of the School of Architecture, two really important contributors. You can read more about their biographies. They're really extraordinary individuals. So that application process is also for us tied to getting to know those of you who might want to be considered for those fellowships.
Fabulous. We have a question from Jonathan. Jonathan, it feels like this question is for the students, although also the faculty can chime in too. Do you want to, can I give you the baton for you to ask your question? That might be too much to ask. I understand. So Jonathan asks.
Oh, he's answering.
Oh, good.
Hi, I'm sorry. Did you want me to rephrase the question and ask it in person?
Oh yeah, I mean, just hearing other voices beyond our own is way more fun.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, just restating the question would be great.
Yeah, no worries. Hi guys, my name is Jonathan. I'm a prospective student looking into the Master's in Urban Environmental Planning at the A School. And I guess what I wanted to echo my question, I guess it goes both for students and for the faculty professors on this chat. I'm hearing like a lot of like collaboration work. There's a lot of work that's focused on interdisciplinary work, and that's something I'm really interested in looking at. And I guess I want to ask to like the students in this chat that are from different backgrounds, right? How closely do you get to work, with other different majors in the A School when it comes to doing, let's say, studio programs or just taking courses, for example? And also, if the professors can speak on, like, let's say, for example, the research that's done between different student focuses within landscape architecture or urban planning and so forth. I know it was a lot to pack, but yeah, two-part question.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Given that I'm in the urban environmental planning program, I'll kick off and note that definitely there is work across the disciplines. And Professor Wilson, correct me if I'm wrong, but the urban design studio that we start with in our first year is specifically targeted toward planning students. So in that studio, there's not a ton of crossover, although you will get the experience of a lot of planning students do come from architecture backgrounds or landscape architecture backgrounds. So that does exist in the course. In future courses, in future studios, I have had interactions with, or I've worked closely with architecture and landscape architecture students, and I'll inverse that or invert that and say, in the methods of community engagement course, there are students from architecture, from landscape architecture, from other schools that take that course as well. So there is, quite a bit of cross-pollination across the courses.
And Michael's actually a dual degree student with public policy as well. So we have several joint degrees to bring in the other disciplines too.
I might just add a couple things. I mean, because for all the disciplines, all the programs at the upper level, most of the elective courses that exist, as well as the advanced research studios, operate across the entire school. So within those classes, you'll not only get, you'll get students from every single discipline in those classes. And as Barbara mentioned, not only do we have dual degrees offered across all of the disciplines, we also have minors at the undergraduate level and certificate programs at the graduate level. So for example, in the urban design certificate program, the historic preservation certificate program, and we now have a real estate and design program as well. In each of those are always students coming from many different disciplines, especially since those disciplines themselves, historic preservation or urban design, for example, work and operate with the input from architects, landscape architects, planners, etc. So you'll find that your classmates within those programs are coming from disciplines different than yourselves. And the other way, many of our faculty do research that is also interdisciplinary research and bring students together through hiring them through research assistantships, etc. I think there is many opportunities as students look for them. If you're a student who's really interested in reaching out to the other disciplines to take advantage of it, then you'll find every opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I would definitely reiterate what Dean Berman said, but coming from graduate history, architectural history, but I have been able to take classes in architecture, planning, and then outside of this in art history and history. And so it really depends on, there's a great relationship with these professors here, and they get to know you, and you say, hey, I have this idea for this course, and then they're very responsive. And it's really just reaching out to the professor in that course. And knowing me, I always I'm not a designer. Can I still take this class? And so, they understand where I'm coming from, and they can totally say no if it's something that doesn't relate, and that's totally fine. But it's that one-to-one choice, I think, that you can have that's really exciting for me, that I can use architectural history within so many different ways and avenues in the school and at UVA.
Just wanted to add to what Samantha and Dean Berman were saying about collaboration. It only makes my work better. Right now, my collaboration team for research assistants for my book is across the school, and it's changed my work. And for instance, tomorrow, 5 of us are going up to Monticello, and that's part of a chapter of how we look and understand space, and to see it from landscape, to see it from planning, to see it from history, as well as architecture. But I also wanted to share, and I'll put in the chat, other programs that we also have, and this is Project Pipeline. And Professor Wilson, who's on the call with me as well, Professor Ripple, their opportunity where we, from our different fields, are then working, connecting with the Charlottesville community. Maybe Barbara, if I could pass it off to you to just explain the South First Street project, but you can see when you look at this link, the fact that we were connected with the school on this interdisciplinary way of working is really a great way for students to be involved. Students were leading teams of students, as well as a field trip organized this idea of understanding architecture in our space.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we mentioned, talking about our relationship with the Equity Center that I direct, and Elgin is the director of design So there's a lot of direct relationships between that university-wide center, which also brings in a bunch of other disciplines and actually design justice work that we're both committed to. And in that project, the Public Housing Association of Residents, which is a key collaborator, asked for our help. One of the resident leaders at South First Street, where they are doing community-led redevelopment work, has a vision for a nature playground in this beautiful pocket that was not yet developed, and a pedestrian bridge was going in. They were going to have to take down a historic ash tree that's beloved. And so we had a 2-week summer program that actually continues now through, through till today, even on Zoom. Elgin's the director of the program, and but the partnership has been about having high school students that are young designers learn the skills of design to then apply it to their own communities in really meaningful ways, as the designers resourced for their time, as we do in every project. So it's really joyful. We've been able to have parallel classes. So there was a set of planning students that took supporting that project as a class, and then a set of other students actually from a couple different rounds of architecture, and then in the PhD program that were supporting it as a summer job. So that's been a really wonderful thing, and a continued partnership with Public Housing Association of Residents. Tatiana has a question. Can I hand you the mic?
Hi, yes, thank you for all the great insight into the A school. My name is Tatiana. I'm an undergrad, or I was an undergrad a couple of years ago at UMD, interested in the MArch program, and hearing from Rebecca about the independent study program, that sounds really interesting. I was curious if that's possible for MArch students, if that's possible with workload, maybe if there's a log somewhere of some of the projects that people have done in the past, and just overall what that process is like, because it sounds really interesting.
So maybe, Tatiana, I can answer that. Independent studies can happen across any discipline, and undergraduate and graduate. It's really about the relationship between a student and a faculty member who takes you on as an advisor for the independent study, and they usually replace elective classes. So you have many different opportunities for that, and it's really up to the faculty member, so many students do this when, they might be working with a faculty member, they might be really interested in their research or really interested in their coursework, and they come to them with a proposal, and that's all it takes. So it's not a difficult process. I don't know that we have a place where we have all the independent studies that are up. But you can certainly see student work on the website, and some of that obviously is coursework, and some of that is from independent work. And I should also add, another place that independent work happens is within theses, depending on the discipline. So in the MArch program, in the last semester, all students can opt for an independent thesis, and that's another place where you're doing independent research.
Great. Thank you.
Michael, or anyone else in environmental planning, how much experience did you have coming into the school? Did you have a resume or portfolio when applying, and how important is that for a first year? So Michael, you take over, and then I'll pass it back.
Yeah, sure. I'll just note that if it's possible to have the opposite of any portfolio or design experience, that's what I had. I had absolutely no design experience before coming to the school. And so the first semester, which it was my first semester, I don't know if it's first semester or second semester now, but you'll definitely get an urban design studio. And that was one of the most challenging but most rewarding classes I've taken in the curriculum. It was just a whole new muscle that I didn't know could be exercised. And it's really important in, articulating your thoughts and how you want to configure the built environment and all that jazz. So if you have any other questions besides that, I'll kick it to faculty in case there's more insight.
Yeah, I might be the only urban planning student or member. So I will say that that actually the program really prides itself on the fact that well, the discipline is really, really diverse in the ways we're trying to solve big problems in the built world. And so we actually welcome bringing in a wealth of different types of backgrounds. We think the program is stronger when that happens. We're actually also often ranked as one of the highest quality small programs because you get to know your faculty really, really well. And we are invested in you as people. So to Michael's point, because we're in a school of architecture with very high quality design instruction, you're given any background you need, and those levels, we really just want you to be a committed intellectual who's curious about all the different ways that you can, you know, help solve these really complex urban problems.
And maybe if I could just add one of the things that, I mean, for urban planning students coming in, and because as Barbara said, our students come from every background, meaning, you know, we'll have students that have undergraduates in biology, economics, theater, I mean, you name it, without a background in the discipline that they are going into. For urban planning, the studio that Michael was referring to, the first urban planning and design, spatial planning and design studio, expects that you know nothing about design. We have sort of two early programs, the Summer Design Institute, which we sort of refer to as the Design Boot Camp. And we also have the first Urban Design and Spatial Planning Studio. And both of those expect that students are coming in with no background in design and take you through that process. The 0 to 100 in a very short period of time with great faculty who will teach you everything you need to know.
Also, Katie, because I briefly heard you mention that you're applying as an undergraduate from high school. I can speak to sort of an underclassman experience in planning as a second year. I did not come into the school with any prior experience. I actually transferred into the school after my first year here at UVA in the College of Arts and Sciences. Your first year in the School of Architecture will equip you with all of the skills that you need in design and planning and in architectural history through an interdisciplinary approach. So there is no need to feel that you need to come in with a wealth of knowledge and experience, because your advisors, upperclassmen, and faculty will all help you develop those skills in the different disciplines. And continuing into planning, you'll learn all of the technical skills as well in starting in your second year.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and this is an indication. It's worth also looking at the faculty, because I came to planning through a side door. My training is not in planning or in architecture, and I sort of meandered into both fields, and also architectural history and landscape, from side doors, back doors, trap doors in the roof. And the important thing is the kind of questions that you bring in, the way in which you're imagining and reimagining in a space, and understanding the ways, you know, what it means for us to, you know, coexist, what it means for us to share space and, you know, create space and, you know, imagine in a more just, you know, as the school has on its webpage, you know, we're interested in what it means to create a just and compelling future. And there are many ways in which to do it. And actually the most compelling way, you know, to imagine that is by bringing a range of questions from a variety of disciplines and perspectives. So, you know, we're here to also help support you to, acquire that language that, you know, that in architecture and in planning, architectural history, landscape, they're all languages and all the vocabulary that people are here to help support you and help you, you know, develop that grammar, develop that language. And part of the way of doing that is also by, you know, being able to speak in multiple languages, you know, that all reinforce and bolster and enrich, you know, each other. So, you know, don't let it, you know, worry you, or, you know, fear not that you don't have enough, you know, design skills, or, you know, you don't have enough math skills, or, you know, that you're not sure, how to handle an archive and, what the history means, that there's a whole, support network there for you. And that actually, many times, as a poet, Wisława Szymborska says, the most urgent questions are the naive questions. It's the questions more than anything that we're interested in. We'll get you to a place where you have the kind of vocabulary to actually have the answers. But being multidisciplinary and coming from multiple perspectives is actually not a disadvantage.
Whenever Garnette speaks, I wish to just like end on that. He came into, and I will say to the question from Markel about interdisciplinarity, I'm teaching a course right now that's a methods of community engagement course like I teach in planning, but it has, I think, out of the 16 people in it, like 8 different degree programs from across the university. I often have up to 16 different degree programs represented in any of the electives I teach. And I work more with the people in this call than I do, sometimes my own disciplinary backgrounds. But what's really wonderful about UVA is they actually foster and encourage faculty to work together in both teaching and research in pretty committed ways and high quality ways that allow you to create that culture and sustain that culture across the university. So not just within the A school, although that is clearly a place where we find our fellow travelers quite easily. Haley had a question that several of you could answer, so I'll just throw it out there about when you're considering a program to apply to, and maybe this will be the last one to finish up on time, do you suggest altering your portfolio design work to better fit the application for that specific school?
Maybe I'll answer that one, Haley, because I often tell students who are applying, if they're applying to architecture, landscape architecture, not to try to, put in the drawing of your parents' house or the one plan, the thing that will look architectural or that will look like, landscape, but rather show what you do that's creative and show yourself through the portfolio. It's really about putting your best work forward, whatever that might be, in whatever form, because students do everything from, photography to building things, to making videos. And that's the kind of range in a way that, that we're looking for, because in the end, we really just want to see, your creative abilities. So do what you do best.
Great, thank you so much.
So I think that, we're close to the end of things. And as you can see that, we're happy to answer questions that, the emails were shared in a chat box. So please make use of that. Seek us out. We're happy and ready and enthusiastic, not only to answer your questions, but also to have you here so we can continue this conversation that began here. As I know, Zoom is, sometimes you need a break, or sometimes it's time just to zonk out, just to catch your own sanity. So you might have missed some of this, as we're talking, but I hope you recognize just how much, for us, what is especially important is, you bringing you, as Sneha said, your curiosity, your energy, your experiences, your histories, your questions is what, will help, shape and reshape and help us think about, how to not only meet your needs, but also to have a school that, it's, seeking to, continue to fulfill its goal of having, just and compelling, thinking about just and compelling futures. And there is, as compelling as the kind of questions and answers you bring. But also remember that, we're all part of this story in which we're asking, what does it mean, especially now that we're thinking about national issues this week, what does it mean to coexist? What does it mean to be in conversation together? What does it mean to actually imagine futures, even when we're, having differences in our beliefs or how we imagine ourselves in the environment? How to, create one in which we can share and, be along with. And imagine different futures for different communities, different groups together. But also, we're doing that here by thinking very much, what does it mean to, bring a multiplicity of perspectives, which is why, we are so focused on diversity and equity and inclusion, is to ask, what does it mean not only merely to belong, but to ensure that nobody's excluded, as we're thinking about belonging and home. So please continue asking us questions. Feel free to get in touch with us. You have a range of absolutely wonderful and helpful and kind, sort of, faculty and students and staff, already to be there for you. So, see you, online and, at some point we all hope in person. And thank you very, very much for coming and sharing this time with us.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye, and feel free to reach out at any time to any of us.